The academic year 1963 to 1964 was momentous in a way that few others have been since. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated here in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Less than 3 months later, on February 9, 1964, the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, their first live appearance in the United States. The assassination of John F. Kennedy changed American politics forever, and the arrival of the Beatles changed American music, both popular and classical, forever. But my intention is not to talk about music or politics. That academic year was momentous for me because it was my first year in college. I left home late in August, boarding a bus at the Greyhound Terminal in downtown Omaha, Nebraska, and rode 3 days to San Bernardino, California, where a station wagon, not an SUV, from the University of Redlands, was waiting to take me the 20 miles to Redlands. I had been to California only once on a family vacation in 1953, but had never been to Redlands. That backstory is necessary for me to make sense of what I want to tell you. My choice of the University of Redlands was virtually the roll of the dice. I had been accepted other places, but my senior English teacher told me that I needed to go to Redlands because it was the farthest from Omaha. Until that time, I had planned to enroll at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, where I was guaranteed a full tuition scholarship because of my scores on statewide exams. I was going to major in English and concentrate in creative writing. I planned to take organ lessons on the side to progress in my favorite hobby. But here's what happened. When I registered to take organ lessons at the University of Redlands School of Music, I had to audition to be assigned a teacher. I played the G major Jig Fugue by Bach from memory. Immediately, the chairman of the School of Music and head of the organ department offered me a scholarship to make up the difference between what I had already been given and full tuition if I would become an organ performance major. My ego could not refuse. And so I became a music major instead of a creative writing major. It might seem that I let others, authority figures, make important decisions for me, but I don't think I did so any more than any 18-year-old. In 1963, I had no driving passion. I did not know, in terms I later learned from the great teacher of spirituality, Joseph Campbell, what my bliss was, much less how to follow it. Campbell meant that which fills one with joy and gives meaning and purpose to one's life. I want to read through Campbell's admonition. Quote, "Follow your bliss. If you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while waiting for you. And the life you ought to be living is the one you are living. When you can see that, you begin to meet people who are in the field of your bliss, and they open the doors to you. I say, follow your bliss, and don't be afraid, and doors will open where you don't know they were going to be. If you follow your bliss, doors will open for you that wouldn't have opened for anyone else." End quote. For much of my life, I have not followed my bliss. I have not followed a straightforward path. My life has been mostly a great series of detours. In that academic year, 1963-1964, I think it is fair to say, I had no concept of a trajectory for my life. I had no idea what I wanted to be if I ever grew up. I still don't. I do not regret any of the decisions I have made that led me to the place where I am now. I do, even though Charles Schwab says I should not, ask myself, How did I get here? We all have to figure out certain personal idiosyncrasies that affect our decisions and our lives. Now is not the time to talk about mine, except to say that I've done pretty well considering some difficulties I've had to overcome, all centered in my brain. My particular demons are temporal lobe epilepsy, bipolar disorder, and alcoholism. That's all I will say about that, except that discovering and naming them so I could deal with them took too much of my energy until I was 40 years old. In some ways, I allowed them to keep me from discovering my bliss so I could follow it. When I was 29 years old, I finally made the decision to try to fulfill the promise of my undergraduate education and earn a PhD in organ literature at the University of Iowa. That meant quitting a well-paying but tedious job that I hated. Oh, how I hated it. Selling my house in Upland, California, and moving with my late ex-wife halfway across the country. Shortly after I made the decision, I had a conversation with an uncle in which we talked about my pending move. He asked me, "Do you mean you think you have the right to give up everything and move to Iowa so you can make a living doing what you want to do?" He had been stuck in a high-powered, enormously lucrative job that he hated his entire life, and could not imagine chucking everything to follow what I thought at the time was my bliss. I thought I could, and I did. The convoluted story by which I ended up teaching first-year writing at Southern Methodist University in Dallas is too boring to tell here, except to say that it involved a 17-year sojourn in Boston, for which I am grateful. It's a story which began by my thinking that having found him, I would be happy divorcing my wife and moving the rest of the way across the country to live with him. It was neither the first nor the last time I made a life-changing decision based on my confusing fun, momentary happiness, and self-centeredness for my bliss. My move to Dallas to be with my partner, not the him of my first move, was fortunately a rational decision that set me on a path much more likely to help me follow my bliss. I came to Dallas in 1994, both to be with my partner and to work on another PhD, this one finally in creative writing. I discovered after passing the comprehensive exams that I did not need a second PhD, but that work enabled my being hired to teach English at SMU. When I moved to Dallas, I also found a position as music director at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Farmers Branch. My partner died in 2004, 5 years after I began teaching at SMU. St. Paul Lutheran Church closed in 2010. Today marks the end of my formal teaching career. My 3 p.m. class today will be my last at SMU. I'm giving this lecture for a couple of reasons. The first is purely selfish. I believe that changes like the one I am making today need to be marked, to be celebrated, definitively. I need to put a period on this chapter of my life. That's not quite as self-centered as it might seem. The second reason is to say something to you that you probably can't hear today, but that you may remember sometime along the path, and know that you are not alone on the path. Find your bliss if it takes 50 years. Find your bliss if it takes 50 years. Find your bliss if it takes 50 years. I'm sure for most of you, finding your bliss means making piles of money, or being famous, or both. Making piles of money is not a bad thing. but it cannot be your bliss. Your bliss has to be something that goes on in your head and in the life of your emotions. Money, even billions of dollars, cannot be your bliss. Period. I love Alice Walton, you know, owner with her siblings of Walmart. She is, according to Forbes magazine, the 8th richest person in America, worth $33.5 billion. She's taken a few millions of her dollars and created the Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas, a truly wondrous place with a breathtaking collection of American art, free and open to the public. And you can take pictures of the art, unlike any other museum. But the most famous photograph of Alice is the mugshot taken of her when she was arrested for drunk driving in Fort Worth, Texas. I think I can say, being a drunk in recovery myself, with some authority, that I doubt her billions have ensured that she's following her bliss. I don't know that for sure, but I doubt it. Money, even billions of dollars, cannot be your bliss. Poetry might be a good bliss to follow, or the symphonies of Mozart, or the music of the Beatles, or the eternal attempt to answer once for all whether or not JFK's assassination was a conspiracy, or building a robot that will give the blind their sight, or singing in the opera Fidelio, or finding the God particle, or living passionately with the love of your life for 50 years. My bliss is partly reading weird stuff about strange subjects, such as the French performance artist Orlan, or the role of American fundamentalist Christians in the shaping of the absurd U.S. policy toward Israel and Palestine, or Abraham Lincoln's speeches. My bliss is playing the organ. I have a pipe organ in my living room where I'm sitting. My bliss is trying to help college students discover something they might never have known if I hadn't helped them along the way. And that brings me to my real bliss. My bliss is loving other people. I don't know how to show it most of the time. I've really botched most of my relationships. I haven't had a primary relationship for 10 years, whatever that means now. But in 2 weeks, I'm going to have a retirement party. And 30 people will be there, most of whom will know only 5 or so of the others. And they are all people I love. Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, intellectuals, scholars, plumbers, office administrators, old people, young people. You can do much worse than making your bliss simply trying to feel and think positively about everyone you meet. And being kind. Always being kind. My long-distance cyber friend, the poet Michael Blumenthal, wrote a poem which I'm going to put at the bottom of this recording. It's called simply, Be Kind. Here's a bit of it. Not merely because Henry James said there were but 4 rules of life, be kind, be kind, be kind, be kind, but because it's good for the soul and what's more for others. It may be that kindness is our best audition for a worthier world, and despite the vagueness and uncertainty of its recompense, why not allow the little sacrificial squinches and squiggles to prevail? In the end, so much comes down to privilege and its various penumbras, but too much of our unruly animus has already been wasted on reprisals. Too much of the unblessed air is filled with smoke from undignified fires. Oh, friends, take whatever kindness you can find and be profligate in its expenditure. It will not drain your limited resources, I assure you. It will not leave you vulnerable and unfurled. By following my bliss, I have learned something about poetry, and I know that you have to know what a hedgehog is to understand this poem. Hedgehogs are furry little mammals who, when they are threatened, roll themselves into little balls, and their fur becomes almost as prickly as a porcupine. You will not find your bliss by rolling yourself into a ball and hurting anyone who tries to come too close. Do you want to know why I love the work of Flannery O'Connor and Orlon so much? O'Connor wrote stories about what happens when people become hedgehogs, or conversely, when they refuse to become hedgehogs and learn not to be. Orlon has lived her life doing things that no sane person would do, we think. But she is the farthest thing from a hedgehog. She's out there on the edge showing us how to be both narcissistic and totally transparent at the same time. Donald Siegel warned us, talking about his wonderfully bizarre little film from 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Quote, "People are pods, they have no feelings. They exist, breathe, sleep. To be a pod means that you have no passion, no anger. The spark has left you. Of course, there's a very strong case for being a pod. Those pods who get rid of pain, ill health, and mental disturbances are, in a sense, doing good. It happens to leave you in a very dull world, but that, by the way, is the world that most of us live in. It's easy to be judgmental. Donald Sterling is a pod. Alice Walton is a pod. Oh, come on, we are all pods. We all have the potential to become pods. Just don't. Find your bliss. That's the best I can do, quote someone else. But I have only a few years left to find my bliss. I'm still trying to make sure, as Joseph Campbell said, that the life I ought to be living is the one I am living. If I can be on that path in my 70th year, I beg you to start now. You've only got 50 years left to find your bliss.